When people ask me how to become a millionaire fast, I usually smile a little. I've been on this earth long enough to know that fast means something different to everyone. For most, it means skipping the work, skipping the pain, skipping the discipline. They want the results without the process. But wealth doesn't respond to wishes. It responds to behavior. And behavior is shaped by how you think. If you're looking to build wealth and master the principles of success, subscribe now to join our community and get more insights like this delivered straight to you. So let's move forward. If I were 25 again and starting from nothing, I wouldn't waste a minute chasing gimmicks or secret formulas. I would build a foundation that multiplies automatically, because true wealth isn't earned by sprinting. It's earned by compounding, and compounding needs time, consistency, and rational thinking. That's the first thing most people misunderstand. They think getting rich fast means working faster. It doesn't. It means removing stupidity and creating systems that grow while you sleep. When I was a young man, I learned that intelligence isn't the most important factor in building wealth. Plenty of brilliant people stay broke because they let emotions run their decisions. The key is rationality, cold, consistent rationality. I practiced it like a religion. Every decision I made had to pass a simple test. Would it still make sense if everything round me got difficult? If the answer was yes, I did it. If not, I walked away. At 25, I would start by learning how the world of money actually works. Most people handle money emotionally, not logically. They save what's left after spending instead of spending what's left after saving. They buy liabilities and call them assets. They chase price movements instead of understanding value. To escape that trap, I'd study accounting, basic economics, and human psychology. You don't need a degree. You need clarity. You need to know where money flows and why. I remember early in my career working long hours in law and realizing that no matter how skilled I became, there would always be a ceiling if I only sold hours. That realization changed my direction. I understood that leverage using capital, people, or systems to extend your effort is what separates the rich from everyone else. I moved from earning fees to owning pieces. Ownership was the turning point. If I were 25 today, I'd focus on becoming an owner as soon as possible. Ownership can start small. It can be a share of a business, a side venture, or even intellectual property you create. The goal is to build something that earns while you think, learn, or sleep. The earlier you begin owning, the sooner compounding starts working in your favor. Even a small engine, once built, keeps turning. Most people delay ownership because they're afraid to start small. They think a business must be big, an investment must be impressive. That's wrong. I tell a young person, your first goal isn't to make a fortune. It's to prove you can build and maintain a system that produces cash flow without collapsing. That proof is your first milestone. Once you've done that, scaling becomes arithmetic. The hardest part is believing it's possible before the evidence appears. The second part of the foundation is learning to manage yourself. I've seen intelligent people sabotage their futures because they couldn't control emotion or ego. The world rewards people who remain calm when everyone else loses their heads. That's why temperament is more valuable than IQ. When markets rise, you will be tempted by greed. When they fall, you will be ruled by fear. Your job is to stay steady, to recognize both as illusions. At 25, I would train my mind to stay rational when the crowd becomes emotional. That single habit would separate me from 90% of people. You also need patience, the hardest skill of all. Everyone wants to double their money overnight, but almost no one can sit quietly while their money compounds slowly. The irony is that slowness is the only reliable path to fast. Compounding works geometrically. It starts invisible and ends unstoppable. I've called it the eighth wonder of the world because time does the heavy lifting if you let it. The problem is, most people interrupt it with impulsive decisions. They jump from strategy to strategy, never allowing compounding to do its work. When I began investing seriously, I wasn't chasing the next big thing. I was searching for durable advantages. I wanted businesses that could survive storms, management teams that behaved sensibly, and prices that made sense. That sounds boring, and it is, but boring builds wealth. Excitement destroys it. The world is full of people chasing excitement in markets, and almost none of them retire rich. You can quote me on that dot at 25. I would make boredom my competitive advantage. I'd focus on quiet progress, reading, saving, learning, analyzing. I'd avoid the urge to show off. Wealth likes silence. Attention invites envy and mistakes. The people posting pictures of success usually don't have it. The ones who truly have it are too busy protecting it. Discipline with money starts in small, daily choices. When I was young, I tracked expenses not because I loved accounting, but because I hated ignorance. I wanted to know exactly where my efforts went. If a dollar wasn't working, I redeployed it. Every saved dollar became a soldier fighting for my freedom. I didn't buy things. I bought options. Every unnecessary purchase was a delay of independence. Some people think saving is pointless because interest rates are low or inflation eats returns. They miss the principle. Saving isn't about returns. It's about control. Savings buy flexibility. They give you the power to say no to jobs, to people, to panic. At 25, I'd aim to save aggressively not because I love hoarding, but because liquidity is opportunity. When others are trapped by bills and debt, cash gives you freedom to act. Debt, by contrast, is slavery. I've never liked owing money. Borrowing to buy depreciating stuff is financial suicide. If I were young today, I'd avoid consumer debt entirely. The only debt worth considering is the kind that buys productive assets, something that earns more than it costs. Everything else is chains disguised as convenience. The credit card industry thrives because people trade long-term freedom for short-term comfort. That's the opposite of intelligence. Learning to delay gratification is the secret weapon. Every time you resist an impulse purchase, you train discipline. Every time you choose to invest instead of spend, you shift your trajectory. It doesn't look heroic, but 5 years of consistent, rational behavior can put you decades ahead of people who chase every shiny object. Wealth is a lagging indicator of discipline. The money shows up long after the behavior starts. I've met countless people who complain about luck. They think success is random. It isn't. Luck favors the prepared. The world throws opportunities constantly, but most people can't recognize them because they're unprepared or too distracted. Preparation multiplies luck. I've been fortunate, yes, but I was also ready when opportunity knocked. That readiness came from reading, thinking, and staying liquid. If you're 25, your greatest asset isn't money, it's time. You can afford to make small mistakes and still recover. Use that window to learn aggressively. Read everything that sharpens your mind. History, psychology, business, science. The more models you have for understanding the world, the fewer surprises will destroy you. I built my entire approach on mental models, frameworks that simplify complex realities. They protect you from foolish decisions and make you faster at recognizing patterns. At 25, I'd study them daily. I'd also learn from people better than me. When I met Warren Buffett, I realized how powerful it is to align with the right partner. Good partners multiply strengths and minimize weaknesses. Bad partners do the opposite. So, at 25, I'd choose associations deliberately. Work with people you admire. Avoid those who drain energy or compromise ethics. Character compounds too. Surround yourself with rational, disciplined people. and mediocrity won't find room to grow. Now, you may wonder, if the path is so rational, why don't more people take it? Because rationality feels slow. It lacks the dopamine of speculation. But if you can tolerate boredom, you win by default. Patience and temperament are rare. Markets and careers reward rarity. The few who master them end up with disproportionate results. Let's talk about habits. I believe humans are creatures of routine. We don't rise to our goals. We fall to our systems. When I was younger, I didn't rely on motivation. I relied on structure. I read daily, analyzed daily, and reviewed mistakes regularly. That rhythm kept me from drifting. If I were 25 today, I'd create a daily system that locks in progress automatically. A time to learn, a time to earn, a time to reflect. You can't improve what you don't measure. Reflection is underrated. Every evening, I'd ask myself, what did I do today that moved me closer to independence? What did I do that moved me away? This simple review builds awareness, and awareness prevents repeated mistakes. Most people don't fail because of new errors. They fail because of repeated old ones. Reflection closes that loop. The discipline of compounding applies beyond money. It applies to knowledge, relationships, and health. If I were 25, I'd treat my body like capital. Energy and focus are limited. Protect them, exercise, eat simply, and avoid habits that fog the mind. I never saw a rich man who could think clearly while tired, drunk, or distracted. Clarity is your ultimate asset. And relationships build them wisely. A reputation for reliability compounds faster than any stock. People talk. Networks remember. If you promise and deliver consistently, doors will open years later when you least expect them. Every interaction is a small investment in trust. Over time, those investments produce dividends in opportunity. It's invisible until suddenly you're surrounded by options others don't have. One more thing I'd tell my 25-year-old self: don't envy. Envy destroys rationality faster than anything. The moment you compare your chapter 1 to someone's chapter 20, you lose focus. Everyone's path has different timing. Compounding doesn't show linear progress, so it's easy to think you're behind when you're not. Just keep adding quality decisions. The scoreboard updates in decades, not days. The world today moves faster, but the principles haven't changed. Technology amplifies both intelligence and stupidity. The tools are more powerful, which means the discipline to use them wisely matters even more. Social media can either teach you or distract you. Use it as a library, not a stage. Learn quietly, apply privately, and let results speak. At 25. If I were starting over with nothing but my brain and my habits, I'd still reach financial freedom within a decade. Not because I'd chase shortcuts, but because I'd compound correctly from day one. Rationality scales across time. The sooner you align with it, the sooner wealth becomes inevitable. When I look back, I realize most people never get rich because they can't stick to anything long enough. They jump from one opportunity to another, convinced the next thing will be faster. The truth is, switching costs you more than staying put. Compounding works only when you give it time. I often say, the first rule of compounding: never interrupt it unnecessarily. That single idea explains why so many intelligent people stay poor. They interrupt their own progress because patience feels like failure. If I were 25 again, I'd choose a focus and give it a decade. A decade sounds long, but in the span of a lifetime, it's nothing. You can do almost anything if you're willing to stay consistent for 10 years. People overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10. I've seen this pattern repeat for 70 years. It never changes. Now, let's be clear. Wealth is not just money. It's independence. It's the ability to make decisions without fear. It's sleeping well because your future isn't fragile. Most people think wealth is luxury. I think it's control. The more control you have over your time, the wealthier you are, even if your bank balance doesn't look impressive yet. That's why my advice to anyone young is to design a life where money serves your decisions, not dictates them. When you start building, focus on skills that pay for life. At 25, I'd study persuasion, accounting, and decision-making. These three never expire. Persuasion makes you valuable. Accounting makes you rational. Decision-making makes you rich. Everything else can be outsourced or automated. Learn these deeply, and you'll never starve. I build my life around mental models because they improve decision quality. Each model is like a filter. The more filters you have, the clearer you see. For example, the psychological model of incentives explains most human behavior. If you want to predict what someone will do, look at their incentives. If you want to design a system that works, align incentives correctly. Once I learned that, I could analyze business structures in minutes. Another model, opportunity cost, teaches you that every choice trades something away. People think they can have it all. They can't. Intelligent life is about choosing what matters and ignoring the rest. At 25, I'd also understand that small advantages, repeated consistently, create huge results. You don't need to be twice as smart as others. You need to be slightly smarter, consistently, over time. 1% better decisions compounded daily lead to exponential outcomes. Most people underestimate small edges because they don't think long-term. They'd rather gamble for a windfall than grind for a decade. But the grinders own the gamblers eventually. When I met Warren Buffett, one of the first things that struck me was how unhurried he was. He never looked rushed. He didn't chase. He waited. That patience became his superpower. The world threw him opportunities because he wasn't distracted by noise. At 25, I would cultivate that kind of calm. The calmer you are, the better your decisions. Panic and haste are the enemies of good judgment. If you want to be a millionaire fast, paradoxically, you must stop thinking fast. You must think clearly. When you slow down, you see details others miss. And those details, tiny mispricings, small opportunities, quiet inefficiencies are where fortunes are made. You can't see them while you're running. You see them while you're still. The other part of building wealth fast is avoiding what I call stupid losses. You don't need brilliance to get rich. You need to avoid stupidity. In my entire career, I've focused more on not losing money than on making it. If you just stay out of big mistakes, bad debts, bad partners, bad habits, you'll automatically rise. Avoiding stupidity is easier than seeking genius. Yet most people do the opposite. If I could tattoo one rule on every young investor's hand, it would be this: never risk what you have for what you don't need. I've watched smart people destroy decades of work chasing one more deal. Greed blinds them. The math of loss is cruel. Lose 50%, and you need 100% return just to get back. That's why defense is more important than offense. At 25, I'd think about survival first, growth second. Protect your downside, and the upside will take care of itself. Money multiplies under protection. You must create a fortress around your capital: mental, emotional, and financial. Mentally, by avoiding delusion. Emotionally, by resisting panic. Financially, by diversifying sensibly. I don't mean owning 100 stocks. I mean owning a few solid assets that can endure storms. Concentrate to build wealth. Diversify to preserve it. At 25, I'd build that balance carefully. The best form of leverage today is knowledge. It compounds faster than money. Once you know how to think better, you can apply that intelligence across any field: investing, business, even relationships. Knowledge doesn't depreciate. The market can crash, but your mind doesn't. That's why I tell young people, spend aggressively on education and tools that sharpen your mind. Books, courses, mentors, they pay infinite dividends if you actually use them. I've lived long enough to see cycles repeat. Every generation thinks their challenges are unique. They're not. Human nature never changes. Fear, greed, envy, and arrogance have destroyed wealth for centuries. The technology changes, but the psychology doesn't. That's why understanding human behavior is more valuable than understanding the latest trend. Trends expire. Psychology doesn't. If I were young today, I'd study how people behave in crowds. Crowd behavior is predictable and dangerous. When everyone agrees on something, it's usually wrong. The crowd buys at the top and sells at the bottom because emotion drives them. I made a fortune doing the opposite. When others are greedy, be fearful. When others are fearful, be greedy. It sounds simple, but it's the hardest discipline in the world. To master the discipline, you need solitude. You can think independently while drowning in noise. Turn off the constant chatter. Think alone. Reflect. I spent many evenings reading quietly while others were busy socializing. That quiet gave me an edge. You can't outwork everyone, but you can outthink them. Thinking clearly is a competitive advantage because almost no one does it. Most people confuse activity with productivity. They believe being busy equals progress. It doesn't. The world rewards results, not motion. I've watched entire industries run on busyness while producing nothing. At 25, I'd measure progress by outcomes, not hours. One thoughtful decision can be worth more than 1,000 frantic ones. I'd also be selective with effort. Life's leverage points are uneven. Some actions matter far more than others. Spend your energy on the few decisions that change everything and ignore the rest. I call this inversion thinking. Instead of asking how can I succeed, ask what would guarantee failure. Then avoid those things. It's amazing how much progress you make by simply not being stupid. Another lesson. The people who talk least about money often have the most. They don't advertise. They accumulate. If you need to prove your wealth, you don't really have it. Real wealth is silent power options, not ornaments. If I were 25, I'd stay low profile. The quieter you become, the more you see. And when you see clearly, you make better decisions. Let's talk about habits again because they control everything. Success is just the result of repeated good habits. Failure is repeated bad ones. You don't rise suddenly. You drift daily. At 25, I'd audit my habits ruthlessly. I'd ask, which behaviors make me smarter, calmer, richer, and which make me dumber, anxious, or broke? Then I double down on the first set and eliminate the second. Simple, not easy. For example, reading daily compounds your mind. I've read thousands of books, not because I wanted to look smart, but because it was leverage. Reading lets you learn from others' mistakes instead of your own. It compresses decades into days. If you read one good book a week for 10 years, that's over 500 deep conversations with the smartest people in history. Imagine how your judgment improves. Contrast that with what most people do, scrolling endlessly, absorbing noise, reacting emotionally. They're training their minds to be distracted. Attention is the new currency. Protect it like gold. What you focus on compounds too. Feed your mind garbage, and you'll make garbage decisions. Feed it wisdom, and you'll print good outcomes automatically. There's another mental model I live by. The map is not the territory. In simple terms, reality is messy. No plan survives contact with the real world. That's why flexibility is critical. You can't predict every variable, but you can prepare to adapt. At 25, I'd learned to hold opinions loosely. Strong beliefs, weakly held. That's how you evolve without becoming rigid or foolish. And as your income grows, remember, Lifestyle inflation is the silent killer. The easiest way to stay poor is to spend more as you earn more. The people driving expensive cars often owe more than you think. The real wealthy drive reliability, not luxury. They don't chase symbols because symbols fade. Function lasts. At 25, I'd live far below my means not because of frugality, but because of freedom. Every dollar unspent is a seed for future independence. If you're building from nothing, simplicity is your friend. Complicated strategies hide errors. Simple rules survive. Here's a simple one. Buy quality. Hold long. Reinvest dividends. It worked 50 years ago. It works now. And it'll work 50 years from today. The principles don't change because human nature doesn't. The sooner you accept that, the richer you'll become. Wealth isn't about doing extraordinary things. It's about doing ordinary things without interruption. Save, invest, learn, repeat. Day after day, the world's noise will tempt you. But remember this, consistency outlasts brilliance. You don't need to outsmart everyone, you just need to outlast them. Patience is a superpower. And don't forget gratitude. Gratitude keeps you sane when wealth finally arrives. I've seen money ruin people who weren't emotionally ready for it. They thought wealth would fix their problems. Instead, it amplified them. If you're miserable without money, you will be miserable with it, just in a bigger house. Build emotional wealth first. Discipline, humility, perspective. Then the financial kind will feel lighter to carry. If I had to summarize everything I've learned, it's this: rational behavior, repeated patiently, creates inevitability. You don't have to be extraordinary. You just have to avoid being foolish for long stretches. That's the real get-rich-fast formula, because in a world of chaos, rationality is speed. At 25. If I knew what I know now, I'd start small but think big. I'd compound quietly, avoid envy, stay liquid, read daily, and never interrupt my progress. A decade later, I'd look up and realize the miracle of compounding had worked against slowly at first. Then suddenly, all at once, when wealth finally begins to build, that's when the real test starts. Success doesn't test character as much as money does. It's easy to stay rational when you have nothing to lose. The real challenge begins when you do. I've watched people build something valuable, then destroy it because they forgot what created it. They start thinking the rules no longer apply. They become smarter than the system, faster than patience, richer than discipline. And that's when everything begins to unravel. If I were 25 and my net worth started growing, I'd write down every principle that got me there and keep it visible. Because memory fades faster than wisdom. Write down your rules literally. They become anchors when emotion tries to steer you off course. I'd remind myself daily that my job isn't to outsmart markets or people. It's to avoid stupidity and keep compounding alive. I've lived long enough to see every kind of illusion in money. The illusion of control, the illusion of certainty, the illusion of genius. They all fade when the tide goes out. Buffett and I used to say, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. That's true in every field. When markets turn, when trends shift, when the crowd panics, that's when you see who built on rock and who built on sand. If I were young and just starting to accumulate capital, I'd focus not on making more money, but on protecting the structure that produces it. That structure is your mindset, your habits, and your circle. If those are sound, you'll always rebuild after any loss. If they're weak, no amount of income will save you. Let's talk about money management, because this is where most people self-destruct. They think investing is about predictions. It's not. It's about preparation. You don't predict when the rain will come. You build an umbrella before it does. Markets will rise and fall, count on it. The question is, will you still be rational when everyone else is emotional? I made a fortune because I stayed calm, while others lost their minds. It wasn't brilliance. It was temperament. At 25, I'd build an investment philosophy that fits my personality, not someone else's. Copying others' strategies is dangerous because you won't have their conviction when things get hard. You must earn conviction through understanding. That's why I always preferred simplicity, buying great businesses I understood, at reasonable prices, and holding them patiently. Complexity breeds confusion, and confusion breeds mistakes. You don't need constant action to get rich. You need occasional insight and the discipline to wait for it. People think success means doing more. Often, it means doing less, but better. Warren and I have spent decades sitting and thinking, while others chase the next big thing. That's the edge, the willingness to be still while others run in circles. Another thing, never confuse luck with skill. If you make money once, you might be lucky. If you keep it for decades, you're skilled. The world rewards consistency, not flashes of brilliance. Luck can't be controlled, but behavior can. The way you react to wins and losses determines everything. Most people inflate during wins and implode during losses. If you can stay level through both, you're already ahead of 99%. The best investors, and I'd extend that to the best entrepreneurs, don't just seek opportunity. They seek optionality. Optionality means having choices, the ability to move when the landscape changes. I build my life to maximize options. That's what wealth does. It buys time and flexibility. At 25, I designed my career to create optionality, not dependency. A dependent person can't think clearly. They are always cornered by circumstance. The modern world glorifies hustle, but hustle without direction is noise. I've never admired busyness. I've admired clarity. What matters isn't how many hours you work, but how many hours compound. That's why I tell young people, spend less time reacting, more time designing. Think through what game you're playing. You can't win if you don't understand the rules, or worse, if you're playing someone else's game entirely. One of the hardest lessons I learned early was that not all effort is rewarded equally. Some activities have high returns, others have none. You must identify which is which. Reading and thinking give exponential returns. Arguing, complaining, and gossiping yield nothing. If I were 25, I'd measure every action by its return on time. Ask, does this add knowledge, capital, or health? If not, it's a distraction. Life is too short for low-return habits. Let me tell you something about mistakes. They're expensive only if you don't learn from them. Every error I made taught me something that later made me millions. I don't regret the mistakes I studied. I regret the ones I ignored. The secret isn't avoiding pain, it's converting it. You take a failure, analyze it coldly, extract the lesson, and move on. Self-pity is wasted energy. Reflection is compound interest on failure. People often ask how to find great investments or opportunities. My answer is boring. Wait. The world constantly presents bargains, but they appear only to those who are patient and prepared. I've sat through years of nothing happening before one good opportunity appeared. When it did, I acted decisively. That's the combination: patience plus aggression. You wait long enough to recognize the perfect pitch, then you swing hard. That's how fortunes are made. At 25, I'd practice this mindset in small ways. Wait for good purchases, good relationships, good business partners. The same rule applies everywhere. Quality always outperforms quantity. A few right decisions can offset hundreds of wrong ones. So, be selective. The older I get, the more I realize that saying no is more powerful than saying yes. Every no protects your focus. Every yes consumes it. Wealth also tests your humility. Once money starts flowing, People will treat you differently. Some will flatter you, some will envy you. Both are dangerous. Flattery feeds arrogance. Envy breeds distraction. The only antidote is staying grounded. Remember what you actually control: your effort, your discipline, your decisions. Everything else is noise. Money can make you more comfortable, but it can't make you more capable. That part you must build yourself. I've said before, the big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. That's true not only in markets, but in life. Relationships, careers, and knowledge all reward patience. The modern world runs on immediacy, but compounding runs on delay. You must choose which game to play. If you can learn to delay gratification while the crowd chases dopamine, you'll eventually own assets they can't even imagine. Let's talk about capital allocation, the art of putting money where it works hardest. Most people fail here because they think investing is about chasing high returns. It's not. It's about sustainable returns that don't blow up when conditions change. I always preferred a steady 15% for decades over a volatile 100% for 1 year. Consistency compounds better than chaos. If I were 25, I'd aim for strategies that let me sleep peacefully, not gamble for excitement. The hardest discipline in investing is inactivity. You'll feel the urge to constantly adjust, optimize, or intervene. Resist it. Once a sound plan is set, your main job is to not interfere. I made money by sitting on my hands while the impatient destroyed themselves. Markets transfer wealth from the active to the patient. And that principle applies beyond finance. It's true in careers, relationships, and learning. Now, let's address a truth people don't like to hear. Intelligence is overrated. The world is full of smart failures. Intelligence without discipline is a loaded gun. What wins is judgment. Judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from surviving mistakes. You don't have to be a genius. You just have to avoid being consistently dumb. That's a much lower bar, and yet it's still too high for most. If you want to be rich fast, you must redefine fast. True speed is the absence of delay caused by stupidity. You move faster by making fewer errors, not by working frantically. The person who compounds steadily outpaces the one who sprints and stumbles. Wealth isn't a race. It's a function of direction and duration. Stay pointed in the right direction long enough, and acceleration becomes inevitable. I often compare building wealth to planting trees. You can't force growth by tugging at the branches. You just water, protect, and wait. If you plant early, you enjoy shade sooner. If you plant late, you still benefit eventually, but you'll need more patience. At 25, I'd start planting relentlessly: skills, savings, relationships, knowledge. Every one of those compounds invisibly before it becomes visible. There's a quiet moment that happens to everyone on the path to wealth. The realization that you no longer need to chase. You begin to understand that abundance isn't something you pursue. It's something that grows when you stop disrupting it. You realize your job isn't to find magic, it's to stop making unforced errors. When that shift happens, compounding accelerates, not because you're doing more, but because you finally removed friction. Another subtle but important truth: humility creates optionality. When you accept you don't know everything, you stay open to learning, adapting, and improving. Arrogance closes doors. I've met investors who made one great call and thought they were invincible. Then they lost everything because they stopped questioning themselves. At 25, I'd keep curiosity alive and ego small. The world changes too fast for rigid minds. And remember, money magnifies who you already are. If you're generous, wealth makes you more generous. If you're reckless, wealth makes you more reckless. That's why self-awareness matters. Before you chase money, understand your own nature. Know your triggers, your weaknesses, your blind spots. I've spent decades studying human misjudgment, including my own. The more you understand your flaws, the less they control you. If I were young again, I'd build wealth as quietly as possible and character as strongly as possible. Because in the end, reputation is the shadow of behavior. You can't buy it, and once lost, you rarely get it back. Act with integrity not because it's fashionable, but because it's efficient. Deception requires maintenance. Honesty compounds automatically as you build. Keep your circle small. You don't need a crowd. You need a few smart, loyal people. Buffett once said, "It's better to hang out with people better than you. Pick associates whose behavior is better than yours and you'll drift in that direction." I couldn't agree more. At 25, I'd spend time with people whose thinking challenged mine, not those who simply agreed with me. Iron sharpens iron, and don't underestimate rest. The mind compounds only when it's clear. Burnout destroys rationality. You can't make good decisions when you're exhausted or emotionally drained. I worked hard, but I always protected quiet time. Reflection requires silence. The faster the world gets, the more valuable stillness becomes. There's one final point I'd stress. Wealth creation isn't linear. It's exponential, but only after a long flat period. You'll feel like nothing's working. That's compounding's trick. It tests your faith before rewarding it. Most people quit right before the curve bends upward. Don't. Keep showing up. Progress hides in silence, then explodes in visibility. By the time you realize you're rich, it won't be from one big win, it'll be from 1,000 small rational choices stacked over time. The formula is simple, but the discipline is rare. That's why it works. When the numbers finally start mattering, you discover what money was really for. It was never about luxury. It was about freedom, the ability to live without bending your principles. That's the real dividend of wealth, autonomy. I didn't want yachts or fame. I wanted to wake up and decide what to do with my time. If I could choose how to spend my day, I was already rich. Looking back, I realized that most people chase symbols of success rather than substance. They want recognition more than results. But recognition is just rented attention. Results are permanent equity. I've always preferred the quiet satisfaction of competence over the noise of applause. At 25, I didn't need the world to see me winning. I just needed to know I was getting better each year. Wealth exposes character. Some people use money to build. Others use it to display. I learned that showing off is a tax on insecurity. The people most desperate to prove they're rich are often the most fragile inside. The truly wealthy don't need to announce it. Their peace gives them away. If I were young again, I'd use my ambition to buy calm, not chaos. The modern world rewards noise, but wealth loves silence. Every impulsive purchase, every need for attention, every ego fight, it's all friction. The more friction you remove, the faster you grow. Simplicity is the ultimate luxury. When you reach financial comfort, you face a different problem. What now? Many rich people spend their later years trying to fill a hole that money can't touch. They chase excitement, status, relevance, anything to feel alive again. But meaning doesn't come from addition. It comes from subtraction. The happiest people I know simplified their lives as their wealth grew. They learned to stop wanting more and start appreciating enough. I remember the day I realized I didn't need to win every game. I had spent decades competing deals, investments, ideas. One morning, I woke up and thought, I already have enough. Why am I still racing? That was liberation. When you stop needing to prove yourself, you finally see life clearly. At that stage, the question changes from how do I earn more to how do I use what I have wisely. Money can amplify good or magnify harm. Used well, it creates stability for your family, opportunity for others, dignity for yourself. Used poorly, it becomes a burden disguised as blessing. I've given away a lot of wealth, but I never called it charity. I called it responsibility. Society built the system that allowed me to thrive. Returning value was simply closing the loop. If you're lucky enough to succeed, pass the tools back. Don't just leave money, leave methods, lessons, and principles. You see, the real goal of becoming a millionaire isn't to possess millions. It's to become the kind of person who can create them. Because if you lose it all tomorrow, that mindset can rebuild it. That's why the formula works across generations. Once you master rationality, discipline, and patience, you can apply them anywhere: business, health, relationships, learning. The principles compound everywhere. The longer I've lived, the more I respect endurance. Anyone can shine briefly. Few can sustain. Compounding wealth for 50 years demands emotional stamina. It means staying calm through recessions, ignoring envy, and thinking long after others have stopped. The world forgets that endurance is a competitive advantage. Most of what looks like genius is just survival. Stay in the game long enough, and compounding does the rest. I didn't outthink everyone. I outlasted them. I kept learning while others were celebrating or quitting. Time became my partner, not my enemy. That's another lesson I'd give a 25-year-old version of myself. Play games that age well. Choose work that rewards wisdom over energy, because energy fades and wisdom compounds. At my age, the return on calm thinking is enormous. If you build a career that values experience, every decade becomes an asset instead of a liability. And while you're building, remember that envy is the enemy of peace. You can't be grateful and envious at the same time. Envy makes smart people act foolishly. I've seen billionaires destroy themselves trying to match another billionaire. The easiest way to be miserable is to compare. The easiest way to be content is to focus on progress, not position. If I could whisper one sentence to every young investor and entrepreneur, it would be this: avoid stupidity. The world will offer endless chances to do something foolish. Decline them. Every disaster begins with the belief that this time is different. It never is. Bubbles, manias, get-rich-quick schemes, they all repeat because human nature doesn't change. Train yourself to recognize when the crowd loses its mind, and have the courage to stay sane. Courage, by the way, is underrated in business. It's not the loud kind. It's the quiet one: the courage to wait, to stick to principles, to endure boredom without chasing excitement. Markets reward boredom. Gamblers hate it. Learn to enjoy it, and you'll separate yourself from almost everyone. As I got older, I also discovered that most real breakthroughs come from removal, not addition. Remove debt, remove bad habits, remove toxic people, remove unnecessary complexity. What's left is clarity, and clarity is power. At 25, I thought success came from stacking achievements. Now, I know it comes from shedding what doesn't matter. One of my proudest accomplishments wasn't making money, it was staying rational through chaos. Rationality is my religion. It's what protects you from the madness of crowds and the illusions of ego. But it's fragile. It requires maintenance. Every day, the world tempts you to abandon reason for emotion. You must defend it like an asset, because it is one. If you ever reach the stage where your decisions are driven by curiosity instead of necessity, you've won. That's the real wealth, the freedom to learn for its own sake. I've spent my later years reading more than ever. Books compound knowledge the same way money compounds capital. Each page adds a fraction of insight, and over decades it builds into something remarkable. Looking back, my life can be summarized in a few sentences. I tried to be consistently not stupid. I spent less than I earned. I learned every day. I avoided envy, debt, and arrogance. And I kept good company. That's the formula. It's not glamorous, but it works because reality always rewards those who cooperate with it. When people ask me how to think long term, I tell them, imagine yourself at 90. What decisions will make that version of you grateful? That perspective removes a lot of noise. The future you is a wise judge. Listen to him early. At 25, I didn't realize how quickly life accelerates. You blink and decades vanish. But if you compound wisdom as faithfully as money, you'll like who you become. One day, when you're older and quieter, you'll realize that your real portfolio wasn't your stocks, it was your habits. Your mental models, your temperament. Those are the assets that never depreciate. Guard them like treasure. So, if I were 25 again, knowing what I know now, I'd live by 3 rules. First, earn the right to freedom through discipline. Second, protect that freedom through simplicity. Third, expand that freedom by helping others find theirs. That's the compounding of life itself. Wealth, wisdom, and goodwill multiplying together. And if you do it right, someday you'll look back and realize the millionaire part wasn't the goal. The mindset that built it was.